All right, hey everybody. How's it going? Happy Sunday. Thank you for joining. Give everybody a little bit more time to show up, but here we are. Joshua says he's here. Instead of going to a club full of cryptocurrency people, I feel like this will be less likely to give you a panic attack. We'll try to keep it really nice and chill. I'm doing a little Sunday whiskey drinking, so if anybody wants to join me on that, go for it. All right. Well, today we're going to be stepping through some of the new tools that we just put out with Beaker. This was like pre-release 8, and then we had to put out a hot fix, so now we're up to pre-release 9. But it's a set of tools that we added to improve authoring, which is something we've been working on for a long time, trying to make the authoring experience work exactly right inside of Beaker, and it's been pretty tricky actually. If you look in the release notes, I give a little bit of an explainer as to the history on this, but we're now, I think, getting to a place where the tools feel about right, so I'm going to be demonstrating how to use the preview tools today and show some of the sort of maybe hidden aspects of it that you wouldn't that you might not notice otherwise. I'm being asked to try to pronounce somebody's name in chat. Here we go. I'm going to give it a shot. All right. Well, Gagan Rajput. My best shot, man. All right, so let's dive into it. Here we are with Beaker. And I'm going to basically just author a site here. And it'll use preview mode as we go. I think the site I'm going to make is going to be a pretty kind of cliche site. I'm going to make it a blog that, or something like a blog, that has the ability to publish posts using web APIs. So like you don't have to use your editor, you could actually go to the site, and if you're the owner of the site, it'll give you a text field to post a new blog post, and then you can do it. And I'm going to choose that specifically so I can show how preview mode and the live published version of the DAT interact, because there's some subtleties to the two of them, and I want to make sure that's all clear. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new website using our website template. Oh, that's not how you spell blog. There we go. Let's choose a fav icon for it. All right. So there are a couple of updates actually in this new version. You'll notice we sort of updated the header a little bit, hopefully simplified it in a lot of ways. We got the share button being one of the more prominent buttons right now. Some extra actions over here. And this menu will probably have more items added to it over time. We have this version picker here now, which allows you to choose which historic version, and this actually will also allow us to swap between the published version and the preview later on. Also did some updates to the network tab, so you can get better stats. You can see what the bandwidth usage is right now, which right now is at 0. You can see your historic upload and download for this session, things like that. And here we are in the settings, where you can access the preview mode and also choose to set a local folder for the project you're working on. So let's turn on preview mode real quick. It has to refresh the page for the moment just because of some kludgy code. We'll get rid of that eventually. All right, now we're in preview mode. Now, if I turn off preview mode, if I go back and turn it off, anytime I make a change to the page through this interface, it's going to go straight to the live version, right? This is actually kind of a limitation of the way things have been. So if I open up the editor here and I save a file, so I just replace my index.html with this h1, what we're going to see as you would expect, the page changed, right? Which is a good thing, except that this is the live version of the site. So if I had an audience, if anybody used my site, they'd see this, and maybe I'm not done with all my changes. So the save straight to publish is actually a tricky limitation. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes you're just working on something. Maybe you haven't shared it yet, or you just don't care that much. So you want to just publish live, and it's no big deal. But sometimes you want to get some work done and review it, and then once you're ready to go, then you want to publish it. And so that's the problem that we're solving with this new tool, which we call the preview mode. So if I go into settings and turn on the preview mode, now we'll see this indicator right here telling us it's there. And you'll see this version selector now shows that we're on the preview. And if I open this up, I can actually switch between the historic versions and the preview and the latest published. So let's look at the published version. And we'll see, okay, now it says latest. I can jump back to the preview. So, to demonstrate what happens, if I open up the editor and make a change, so what just happened is that this little indicator showed up saying, hey, there's a change. It's not published yet. And if we go to the live version of the blog right here and refresh, no changes happened. So the live version has not been modified yet. But if I go over and click the Open Preview button, there it is. There's the change, right? And you can see in the URL, we've got this plus preview at the end of the URL. And that's how I know which version I'm looking at. So these plus tags at the end of DAT domains, they're actually version tags. So if I go over to the version picker and I click on this right here, we have been taken back to an earlier version of the site, and you can see this +3 right here showing that we're on version 3 of the site. So with the plus preview, what we've done is we basically created a new virtual version, a kind of a built-in version name, which is the preview. And that way you know which one you're looking at. And if you share this with somebody, I believe what will happen if they don't have a preview, which they shouldn't, is it'll say, hey, you don't have a preview of this site. This URL is no good. So this is really meant just to be used locally with your on your own device while you're doing development. So once you are ready to go and you think that, yeah, this is good, you click on Review Changes, and you get this interface here, which is kind of like the GitHub diff interface for when you're doing a pull request. And you can see what has changed. You can revert individual files, and you can publish individual files, or you can publish it all. So let's go over here, turn on live reloading, and publish it all. And there it goes. Now it's live, right? So the preview tools are basically designed to give you a workflow that I think is pretty familiar to anybody that's ever made a website. Going to work on something in the local preview. Once you're ready, you can publish. Eric asks, is there a way to add comments to a version that explains what you changed? That would be really cool. Not yet. The versioning inside of DAT is really kind of straightforward right now. If I go over and look at this version log, it has this sort of a one-to-one version to file, so to speak. Like every time you make a change, which means either writing a file or deleting a file, that actually causes the version number to increment every time. So if I publish 5 files all at once, that's actually going to take us from like V10 all the way to V15. And at the moment, there's no way to attach any sort of metadata to these versions. So these version tags are kind of simple. They're definitely simple. They're a direct reflection of what the internals of DAT are, because DAT is actually just this log of updates that you've made to a set of files. What we're planning on doing at some point is really 2 things, actually. First thing we're going to do is add multi-writer, which is the tool set which makes it possible for more than one person to read and write, specifically to more than one person to write to a DAT. When that happens, these version numbers are going to get more complicated. They can't just be a single number. They'll become what are known as a version vector. And that just means that basically there's more than one of these numbers going up. So instead of V10, it would probably be something more along the lines of, V10, 5, 8. That's how a version vector looks. We'll find some way to encode that doesn't look quite so ugly. So that's the first thing that's going to change. The second thing that we're planning on is eventually getting a way to something similar to get tags. Basically a way to say at V10, let's tag V10 as version 1.0.0, which is a much more it can be basically anything you want in terms of like what that tag is. So you could have a tag that's like dev branch, right? And I think probably we'll make these tags updatable as well. So they're sort of like pointers to internal versions that can be updated. And that idea is to make it so that you can have versions that are a little bit more intuitive rather than these incrementing numbers. They can be like semantic versions, for instance. And we don't know yet how we're going to implement that just because we haven't gotten to the point that we're ready to do it. So we have to kind of think through that implementation. But however we do it, there's a chance we'll go ahead and add messages at that point so that you can, when you do the tag, you say, here's what has changed since the last tag or something like that. So that's probably when messages or comments will get added to these versions. In the meantime, if you're looking for a sort of a way to do it manually, you could just have a change file, like changelog.md, where you write out everything that's happened. And that's sort of a nice manual way to do it. And for all I know, that might end up being what we end up doing. Because writing to the files is a pretty straightforward way to put in some extra information. Cool. All right. So a little bit of a tangent there, but let's get back into the preview mode thing. So what I showed earlier is that we got this preview mode. You can turn it on, you can make changes to the preview, and then once you're ready, you can publish them all at once or individual files if you want. I also want to show how this interacts with the local folder, because it's important to know this, but also I want to show this off because it was kind of a pain to get right. So the way we've got it set up right now, there's no local folder. It's just the all inside of Beaker. And sometimes you want to use your own editor. You want to be able to use Git. You want to use npm, things like that. So you really need a folder on your computer that you can work from. And that's what the local folder tool is for. So it'll suggest a folder for you. I'm going to go ahead and choose what it suggested. And once I set this folder, all the files inside of the My Rocking blog DAT are going to get written to that folder. There it is. Open up the folder for me so I can see, where it is and all that, and open up my editor. And now, if I go back to files, we've got even another update to the UI where it shows what the local folder is that we're working from. Preview mode's still on. I can click on this and get some options for working with it. Copy the path. That's something I use all the time because in Mac I can do this, which is so handy. All right, open it up in Sublime. So here we are. Here's the source code to my Rocking blog. And I realized, oh man, I forgot to put exclamation points all over the place. That was a silly mistake. Let's go ahead and get that fixed. All right, hit save. And it's just like before, right? One change. Exactly the same. And in fact, I can also open it up in the inline editor, and those changes are there for the preview. But if I jump over to the latest published, of course, those changes, they're not going to be there. Hopefully exactly like you expect. All right, so of course you can preview the change over here, and you can see the local folder set right there. Important bit, live reloading does work on the preview. There we go. That was pretty important to make sure that worked that way. And actually, I didn't have to think too hard about getting that. It was kind of a nice accident because the way that the preview mode is implemented, it just uses the DAT archive interface, but internally it maps onto the local file system, and so live reloading came along for free, that was pretty lucky. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and publish this. And there it is, all the exclamation points in there as they should be. Okay, one last thing to demonstrate is that we've shown not having a preview mode. We've shown having a preview mode with no local folder. We've shown a preview mode with a local folder. The last thing you can do is turn off the preview mode, but keep the local folder. And what this does, it takes you back to what happened basically before you had a preview mode, which means that this folder is gone. You could still visit it, but the preview mode is not active anymore. I just said this folder is gone. That's not accurate. The preview mode is no longer active, but the folder is still there. So I still have my files here. And what happens now is if I change these local files, they will immediately publish. Yeah, interesting. The preview mode still kind of keeps going there. But anyway, publishes straight to the DAT, right? So basically this local folder right here is automatically, it's being watched by Beaker and is automatically publishing to the DAT anytime a change is detected. That generally works pretty good. If you're using Linux right now, our folder watching code kind of isn't that great. So you may find that you're running low on system resources, things like running out of file descriptors and stuff like that. So maybe Linux users should use preview mode. We'll try to get the folder watcher better on Linux eventually. But okay, so, and then of course if I go over to the file view, you can see that preview mode is off and we're just synchronizing the folder there. All right, so that's the basics of this thing. Now let's look into some of the more complicated interactions that occur. Do I have up here? Did somebody punch in this URL? Wow, I'm kind of impressed if somebody manually. Tell me in the chat if somebody here manually copied down that URL and opened it, because I'm not really sure how else I could be syncing. Yeah, uploaded 6 kilobytes. Wow, okay. So we've got preview mode on, we've got a local folder set. I want to show one thing that's, well, two things actually. The first thing I want to show is how preview mode interacts with the web APIs. The two things I'm going to get into are actually pretty relevant because they were the pieces that we had the most trouble with when we were trying to figure out how to design preview mode. For a while we had something called the staging area, which I think a lot of folks will remember. And we had these two interactions that went poorly. One of them was if the web API were to modify the live version, then you got this weird diff where the staging area was trying to tell you to delete the change that had occurred. I explained in the blog post why that happened. So let's look at how the web API interacts with preview mode. Let's copy the URL directly to make sure I'm very clear about this. So it accepts this URL just like any other DAT URL. And we'll find that it works as you would expect. So let's call this the preview DAT. And then let's create one that's not a preview and call it the live DAT. So modifying the URL manually like I just did, that's one way to change the version. Another way I could have gotten the live DAT is using the checkout function. And if you don't pass anything in, it'll just give you the live latest version. Likewise, if you're on the live DAT and you want to get the preview DAT, you can do live dat.checkout preview. All right, nice little way to manipulate the current version. And it actually doesn't change the version that you're doing the checkout on. It returns a new instance that points at that URL. And you don't need to feel weird about using the checkout function. It actually has zero overhead when it occurs. So you could check out as many times as you want. It's just basically doing string manipulation on the URL that the DAT instance wraps around. Right. So what's important about the web API is that the API is going to show us what's in the preview versus what's in the live version. So if I'm going to add a file here, call it preview only.txt. And if I do a, oh, of course, right, got to turn that live reload off. So let's get the preview dat and the live dat. And if we do a read dir of the preview dat, we'll see that that preview only is there as you would expect, but on the live dat, it's not going to be there. So this dat interface is giving us access to the preview. And that's pretty important. This is something that we learned when we tried to get away from the staging area that was actually a problem. You really do need to be able to interact with the preview version because you need your preview version to work like a normal dat does. As an interesting sort of side effect, it means that actually applications are able to manipulate the preview version as well as the live version, which is actually kind of good because sometimes I think there will be cases where we want DATs like applications that are like a CMS, and the CMS might want to take advantage of the preview. So now it can. And so, as you would expect also, we're able to read and write these files. And again, that goes to the preview, but not to the live. There's foo.txt, but it's not. Oh, I just realized this is probably pretty small for everybody. Sorry about that. So yeah, foo.txt is in the preview, but not in the live. If I go over to this diff, you'll see there are two changes, two new files, right? Should be really obvious how that works. Okay, let's point out something that's not so obvious. What happens whenever I write to a live dat? Now, the thing that we did for a long time, the obvious thing is, okay, we write to the live dat, and that's that, right? So if I do live dat.write file live only.txt, what you would expect is that that file gets written to the live version, but not to the preview version. That seems really intuitive, right? Again, that's how we did this for a long time. So if I read dir the live dat, we'll see live only.txt is in there. But if I do a read dir on the preview dat, again, you would expect live only not to be there, but it's there, right there. We've set up the preview mode so that any changes that are written to the live version automatically get copied back to the preview version. And it does that without worrying about any data that's actually in the preview version. So if I have, I've got this foo.txt, right? If I write to, let's take a look at what the current content of that is. All right, it's ASDF. Well, if I write to it from the live dat, the preview dat is going to reflect that change. It got overwritten. So any changes that occur to the live dat automatically get written to the preview dat. Again, we didn't originally do this. It's not the thing that I would expect normally out of this tool set. I would expect the two to be considered separate. We did this because what we found was if you make a change to the live dat, and it's really common that you make a change to the live dat because maybe you store user data in the live dat. So somebody like, if you got like a Fritter app, for instance, a Twitter clone, and they post a new status update to the live version, but you have this preview version, what would happen is that the live version would have the update, the preview wouldn't, and our diff interface would say, hey, there's something in the live version that's not in the preview version. You probably intend to delete that live file. So it would give you a prompt saying there's been a removal in the preview, remove that new status update, and then clicking publish would remove it. Confuse the heck out of everybody. So to fix that, we set it up so that the preview automatically writes to, or excuse me, the live version automatically writes to the preview. And that's our way of solving this problem. Now maybe someday we could come up with something a little more sophisticated, but for the moment, that's the solution. And I think it'll work pretty well because for the most part, when you're writing to the live version, you're writing to the data. The preview mode really is designed to help you develop an application or a website. And so hopefully you're not using the web APIs to change the same things that you're changing in the preview. If people end up having a lot of trouble with this, go ahead and file issues. We'll deal with it however we can, but this is the solution for now. Eric asks, is there any conflict detection when a live dat change overwrites a changed file in preview? Right now there is not. If the live dat changes something that's changed in preview, the thing that got put in the live dat copies over to the preview. It's a little bit stupid, but that's just how it works right now. Again, I'm hopeful that it won't end up being a really big pain for everybody. But this was really sort of the best, you know, splitting the difference that we could come up with, at least for the time that we have available. So it's something to be aware of. Just keep in mind that that's how that interaction works. Okay. By the way, I am drinking Old Grandad, and if Old Grandad ever wanted to send me some free Old Grandad for plugging their very good whiskey on the live stream, put the word out, let them know. Stuff is excellent, and I can't find it anywhere except for our liquor store locally. So give it a shot, Old Grandad. Joshua says, past frustration is now gone. Yeah. There used to be weird interactions with the staging area and the live version, and hopefully now you won't have that weird interaction anymore. Okay, so you know, I talked earlier about what I was going to work on. I said I was going to make a blog that publishes to itself, but actually what I think I'm going to do is demonstrate one other thing that I have come across using the preview mode, and that is what it is like to work on a site that uses ES modules, and I have a preview mode of the ES module, right? So what is it like to build an application that is using multiple DATs? One of the DATs has a library, a module of code that I'm importing into the other DAT, right? So I've got these two DATs, and both of them are in preview mode, and I want to work with the preview of both. How do I import code from the preview mode of one into the preview mode of the other? Octavian, I'll answer your question here in a second, but I just don't want to split the conversation too much. So let's get into this. I'm going to create a second DAT that just contains code, and then my rocking blog will import that DAT and the module in it. So let's create a new empty project. We'll call this one my rockin' module. And sure, we got something that looks like code in here. By the way, if anybody wants to donate a bunch of really nice fav icons that have multiple resolutions, please feel free, because I think our library is a little limited right now. All right, so let's turn on preview mode for our rockin' module, and let's give it a let's go ahead and create index.js, and we'll export functions, say hello. Okay, now that's just in the preview, not published yet. Let's go over to our rockin' blog. Open up the index.html. Add a script tag here. We'll just do this inline. Okay. Oh. So I've imported say hello from my rockin' module library. If I save this and go to the preview, you might think, hey, we ought to see hello in the console, but we're not gonna. We're gonna see that it failed to load. Reason being that we haven't published say hello yet. We haven't published the index.js yet. It's still sitting in the changes that are reviewed, so it's only there in the preview. So I don't think anybody will be too surprised to find out how you fix this. You just add the preview tag, preview version tag to it, and now we're importing off the preview. We should be importing off the preview. What's wrong here? Oh, I got that wrong in the first place. You have to specify index.js, of course. Still is not going to work. We need to include the preview version. And now it works. Okay. So that allows you to import code off of a version of a DET that you're working on and has preview mode, which is okay. It's not bad. That's where we're at right now. The problem with what we're looking at here is that you got to make sure that you get rid of that plus preview before you publish this stuff. And I guarantee you that if I do this long, I'm going to forget to do that at some point. In fact, I think I've already forgotten once or twice. So I'm going to show the sort of crummy way to fix it now, and then I'll talk about how I think we can end up fixing this even more in the future. In fact, what I'm going to show is probably the best way to do upstream dependencies in with ES modules right now in the DAT ecosystem. Kind of a straightforward solution. I hope, and I'm going to have to struggle a little bit with the syntax. But the solution I have right now is to create a vendor file, vendor.js. The idea is if we have all these different import URLs scattered around the code base of my project, then I have to keep them all updated and in sync, and that's pretty difficult. What I want to do is have something kind of like a package.json where all my imports are all listed in one place and they specify which versions I'm using and so on and so forth. We can get the same thing, basically, by creating a JavaScript file where we do all the imports once and then we re-export those imports. And that centralizes basically all of our imports into one file that's a little easier to track and maintain. So I'm going to import and so here I am importing the say hello module, and here's where I got to remember my syntax. Okay, let me think. How do I think actually there's a re-export. All right, time for some Google magic. Rather, I should say DuckDuckGo. Though I may have to switch over to Google if I can't find what I'm looking for. Here we go. Yeah, that's what I thought. So we will do it like this. We'll export say hello from the place that provides it. I'll save that. And then whenever I'm using that say hello, rather than importing from the original URL, I'll just import from vendor.js. Fingers crossed this works like we expect. There we go. Okay. So, I got two windows open. So let's review. I wanted a way to basically centralize all of my imports so that I only have to track the URLs in one place. To do that, I created a vendor.js file. You can name it anything you want, but vendor seems like a pretty sensible name for it. And inside of it, I just basically re-export the modules from the target. So I'm creating this level of indirection. And this makes it possible for me to change the URL over here. I could take off the preview tag or whatever. and save it. And that way I have one place that all my imports are happening, and then every piece of my code inside of my project can pull from this file. Let me know in the chat if any of that is confusing or needs to be clarified. But that's the sort of manual solution to how to manage your upstream dependencies right now, at least for code. It's not bad. It's a pretty straightforward way of doing things. How do I think we will solve this in the future? I think personally the way that we ought to handle this is through something we've been calling DAT modules. Or no, I'm sorry, not DAT modules, DAT mounts. They may end up being called DAT symlinks. We're still kind of deciding the semantics and also the mechanics of this thing. But basically, we're talking about making DATs embeddable inside of other DATs, so that I could say under/vendor/say hello module, basically point a folder, and it's like symlinking to the other DAT module. And that way, you can basically create subfolders that when you open them, whenever you do an ls inside of them or read the files, it actually indirects over to the target DAT and reads from that DAT. That gives the same level of indirection that our vendor.js file does, and it has a couple of other nice benefits as well. But for handling upstream dependencies, the obvious thing is that if you want to change the version that you're using, you just remap that symlink and you're done. So that's what we're exploring right now, and I don't know when we'll actually get around to implementing it. That's probably what will end up happening with upstream dependency management. Octavian asks, you can add multiple exports in vendor.js. You can. So let's just pretend I had another say goodbye. I could just use the exact same It's a good question, Josh. So hopefully, if Octavian, this should be clear. You can also export multiple things from one module, things like that. Josh was asking if you could do a try catch. I don't know if you can try. Can you try catch import export keywords? Because if you can, that's an interesting idea. Basically, what Joshua is suggesting here is that you try the exported version first, or excuse me, try the preview version first. If that fails, fall back to the non-preview version. The idea being that the preview version is only going to be available to the person that's working on it. So if you forgot to change it, then the any audience member, any consumer of your tools that shows up, they will fail to do the preview import. It'll automatically try to do the non-preview import, and that'll succeed. Interesting idea. I don't know. Can you try catch? Let's find out if you can do a try catch on imports and exports. Obviously bad URL. All right, let's see what happens when we refresh the page. Unexpected token import. Yeah, I'm thinking that's because it's inside of a try statement and it doesn't like that. Yeah. I wonder what the language rules are specifically for that, because it's must be something like import is not allowed inside of a code block. It has to be top level. So yeah, nice thought, Joshua, but nah, that didn't work. Okay, let me answer a question from before. Octavian asked, how will live preview overwrites work when multi-writer is implemented? That's a good question. A bigger question, how will conflicts work in general with multi-writer? I don't know yet. The first question to ask is, how will multi-writer's conflict resolution work, which is a question that we have to answer at some point, but not yet. So I've been gladly deferring thinking about that. It'll probably be, I mean, you know, conflict resolution is not exactly a new thing, even for end users. If you've ever used Dropbox, they have conflict resolution in their thing, and I'm not saying it's necessarily a good conflict resolution, but they have it, so we can kind of look at what they have and experiment with that. It's definitely one of the most widely deployed, eventually consistent file conflict resolution algorithms out there. So we'll start with, just the multi-writer conflict resolution, and then if we find that we have a good tool that's reusable for that, then we may in fact go ahead and use the same tool for the local preview. Optimistic concurrency. Well, certainly it's going to be optimistic concurrency in the sense that if there's no sense of a conflict, there won't be a problem. It'll just go ahead and write over the preview. The problem is whenever there is a conflict, then you can't be optimistic anymore. Your optimism has failed you. Right? I'm understanding what you're saying, right, Eric? Yeah, I don't know how we're going to end up handling conflicts. If I remember right, it's been a while since I've used Dropbox, if I'm being honest. But if I remember right, what they would do is they would create 2 files and add add an extension to the end of them, saying something like, or some kind of addition to the file name, saying like version 1, version 2. These are in conflict. And I think they would also mess with the shell UI so that it would give a little icon on top of the actual file icon, so that you knew something was wrong, if I remember right. And then maybe you would use the context menu, or maybe you would just rename once you had chosen how to resolve the two. Anyway, if we're not going to do that, we'll probably have something that indicates in the file listing that there's a conflict, and we'll have to give some serious thought to that, because conflict resolution is terrible. It sucks. Nobody likes doing that, and applications are going to need to handle it. Users are going to need to handle it. We need to come up with some pretty robust tools for that. So you can keep both versions, latest wins. Right, yeah, right. You just kind of mark that a conflict occurred and that one of the versions was chosen, but you could look inside of some kind of special interface to see what was not kept and then diff between them. That may end up being what we do, because nobody likes being forced to stop whatever they're doing to do conflict resolution, and in a lot of applications it's probably fine to go ahead and just be like, we took the latest right, and then but if that was wrong, you can check the history and pull out what data was lost. So that's probably how that'll go. Okay, well, I think I've demonstrated basically everything I was going to demonstrate. So we got about 15 minutes. Usually I like to do an hour long on these things. We can open these up for questions. And so while people are thinking of any questions they got, I think we'll probably turn on my music and I'll try to find something else to work on. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Eric asks, can I show the improvements to network debugging? We didn't improve network debugging, we improved the network stats. So you can see in this interface, you can see downloaded and uploaded. If some bytes had been downloaded and some, if that wasn't 0, we actually show a ratio of your upload as well. So we just improved the stats tracking on this thing. Now we do have this network debugger. I didn't make any improvements to it, but it is there. And it is definitely a frightening interface. Needs to get some love, as does a lot of the stuff having to do with networking inside of DAT right now. But this is a way to see, basically, you get 2 different logs. One of them shows connection-related events, one of them shows discovery-related events, and then we have this really crummy interface for seeing how many peers there are. And one thing worth knowing is that you can actually click on these cells to apply filters, which is pretty handy. So here I just applied a filter saying only show me traffic type of incoming responses, or if I want to restrict down to a specific peer, I can click on the peer cell and get it restricted down to there. Bet you money this interface will get even better the next time I have to debug the DAT networking, because that's entirely what this interface is driven by, is me trying to figure out what the heck is going on and needing better interfaces. So that's how that development gets driven. So these logs are pretty hard to parse for somebody that doesn't know a lot. In fact, they're still even, about the internals. They're even hard for me to parse sometimes. But the discovery has to do with finding peers. Connection has to do with actually connecting to them. You can see what kind of connection is being established. You can see what ends up happening. It's interesting that this peer is timing out. How are we discovering this peer? 18423. Do we get any information about that? No, but it's pretty sure that we're finding this peer off of probably getting it off of the tracker. I'd be very shocked if we were getting this peer off of the local area network because nobody else is home. So if I'm getting this peer off the local area network, I'm freaked out. So this must have been somebody that punched in the URL watching the live stream. Again, whoever you are, you're a crazy person. You're awesome. So anyway, this person is connecting, and after about, looks like, let's see, that after 100 seconds, that time, this one is after 60 seconds rather. So 10 seconds, 60 seconds, 60 seconds, about 2 minutes there. They're timing out. The timeout's interesting. Not really sure they ought to be, because clearly the same peer is making a connection. They start replication. That's all fine. Then what ought to happen is that they ought to just sit there and heartbeat every... I think we got the heartbeat set on 5 seconds to keep the connection alive. And they're very consistently dying no longer than 2 minutes. So something's going a little screwy. But I couldn't tell you why that might be happening. I don't know enough about the state of the code to know if that's actually a bug or some intended behavior. But that definitely, if it's a timeout, I'm 99% sure that means the heartbeat is not coming in. Thank you, Cosmic. I appreciate it. Yeah, fixing up the usability of Beaker is priority number one. We kind of, so just to give a little sort of explanation about what's been going on, we've spent the past, Beaker officially came out a little over 2 years ago, and then really for the past year, the first year of it-ish was just getting the tools there and working. The second year was a lot of exploration, trying to figure out how to build applications and things like that. So I was often torn between working on Beaker or working on Homebase or Hashbase or working on applications like Fritter. I had to shift my focus really frequently to kind of keep everything all moving together. And a big part of that was just trying to understand how to build applications on this tool set, which is, it's a big question because I believe in the tech, but I don't know how it's all, certainly at the start, didn't know how it was all going to come together. But about a month ago or so, it kind of all clicked about how we were going to build a set of applications, especially once Citizen, that API got started. I kind of began to understand that we can get started with having everybody build personal websites and then have people build a social graph of these personal websites. So I'll be at paulfrazy.com and I'll follow other people. So Tara will be at teravansel.com. We'll have a bidirectional follow relationship, and then we'll reuse these websites as a way to send data back and forth to each other. Once that became clear, it was like, okay, so we know where we're headed. We know how the stack's going to work. And so now I've stepped back and started focusing on Beaker's UI and UX and making sure that everything works very cleanly and correctly, that it's very obvious how to get everything done so there's no more stupid roadblocks stopping people from accomplishing what they want to do. And getting this preview mode in there was a big part of that. So hopefully now people can work on their sites and get the development work done that they want to do. And there's a couple more updates I would like to make to these interfaces. I think the inline editor could be better. In fact, what I would love is that when you click the editor, it would be really sweet if what happened was you left this sort of like, right now you stay kind of inline, almost like how GitHub does it. Maybe a reason for that. May have been inspired by GitHub a little bit. But what I would really love to see is once you go into the editor that we actually get something like an IDE where like the file listing shows up on the left, and you can click around in the files, and then the right side, most of the interface is just the editor, so that you can just be in edit mode now and just work as if you had an editor in your browser. I would love to do that. I don't know when it's going to happen. I mean, I've actually written that code like 3 times because we originally had a full sort of editor inside of Beaker. So maybe more like twice, because then I pulled it out and made it an independent application. So I'd love to get that back in now as just a sub mode of this view, but it's a lot of code, a lot of complexity. I don't know when I'll get to that. But probably what's going to come up next is getting people to build profile sites. I think I want to put in a built-in interface that actually like prompts you to make your personal site. Then I want to spend a little time getting home base better. Not hash base, but home base, so that people can self-deploy well. And then I want to get home base and hash base and Beaker all able to communicate with each other so that you can easily publish and set a DNS name for a project without having to leave the editor interface of Beaker. So if you could sit down at Beaker and get all the way to building an app, having it reliably online, have a short name with DNS without ever having to leave the built-in tools, that would be sweet. Then you got a full website creation and publishing tool set. So that's what I'm trying to aim at right now. We'll see about some of those pieces because it may be asking for more than is possible with especially the DNS stuff, but we'll see. Let me read some of these in the chat here. Yeah, Cosmic, I think that hopefully the process we've taken was the right one. You're right, we could link to an outside IDE, so we could actually have an editor application be third-party. Thought about doing that, or it could just be another built-in page, but a different page. But, you know, first of all, I'm completely on board with that basic premise. I want the ecosystem of DAT applications to have... Music's a little intense. Let's change this up. I want to have composition like that so that one application can call out to another application, because I think that's a really big part of creating a system where users are in control, where I click on something and then my opinion gets injected. So that's actually one of the reasons that the web intents are on our roadmap somewhere. But I also think having a nice built-in editor is kind of like the things that are built in say a lot about what you expect people to do and what you want to make easy. So like the things that we choose to make easy are also sort of a statement about what we think people ought to be spending their time on. And that's one in particular that I think is a good idea to make easy, because I really like the idea that people could sit down at Beaker, can be very new to making websites, but be given all the tools that they need, while simultaneously anybody that's a more familiar, more expert user that has their own editor that they like, they can use things like the local folder to jump back out and use Sublime, for instance, or Emacs, or not Vim. Nobody should ever use Vim. That's a bad editor. Eric asks, did I see Peter Van Hardenberg's pushpin where your URL becomes your identity? I did see pushpin. Pushpin is awesome. Anybody who has not seen pushpin should search on Twitter or YouTube, see if he's got a video of it somewhere. It's like, how could I describe this thing succinctly? It's like a big canvas where you can stick widgets, and this canvas is networked so that people can, in kind of real time, be in the space together. So if I'm on the canvas and you're on the canvas, then we see each other there together in real time. And you can drag these widgets onto it, and these widgets are programmable. It's old school, let's think big about the UI kind of work, which I love. And I think that it's so cool that they're working on it. And it's doubly cool that they're using DAT tech to do it. And they also are thinking really heavily about using touchscreen tech, so like, you know, touchpads, and I would imagine stuff like what Microsoft is doing with the giant whiteboard computers, which I also think is awesome, because AR, VR is probably the most, you know, exciting next step for a platform. But I think there's no doubt that like Surface-based, you know, touch screens have not fully been explored. I think Microsoft is awesome for pushing that stuff even more. They're so built, you know, they call everything that they do Surface for a reason. And so pushpin fits, I think, into what I think Microsoft sees, which is there's just a huge opportunity to create innovative interfaces where you're touching the screen directly. So now that I've ranted about that, back to your question, your URL becomes your identity is exactly what we have in mind. I think that not you can use a raw URL, but what we're going to push people to do is get domains, and so that on this sort of social network of websites, you can at somebody by adding their domain, which I think is says exactly what we want it to say. Like everybody understands intuitively that a domain is an independent identity that you own. That's not going to be a part of. It's not a part of Twitter. It's not a part of Facebook. It's your identity, and it's the top level primitive of identities on the web. So, of course, we should use domains. I think not everybody likes DNS, but I'm fine with it. So we're going to use it. Yeah. You could, of course, use the raw .dat URL as your identity if you want. And maybe some of the hardcore cypherpunk style people will be like all about it. But then you lose the level of indirection that a domain gives you. So there's a downside to that. Not to mention that it's a 64-character hex string, so I wouldn't recommend it. Octavian asks, yeah, correct. Ink and switch. I am able to put in URLs, so let's see if I can get it right. Yeah, okay. Here's that URL. So I put in the chat the URL to pushpin if anybody wants to try it out. Oh yeah, they have a video there too. Really cool stuff. Okay, Joshua asked a very good question. Earlier this week, he smushed together his Fritter and Citizen profiles. Is that fine and okay, or will it cause fires? Well, if I remember right, Citizen actually follows the Fritter formats. So stepping back a little bit, Citizen is a module I'm working on. It's a set of APIs for what I would say it's a set of high-level data structures, basically. So right now it has things like an API for reading and writing microblog posts and having a feed. It's got APIs for following people and unfollowing people and seeing followers and things like that. Basically all the functions that Fritter has. I'm going to expand that even further so that it has APIs for sort of more generic things like link collections, I think, will be one of them. Perhaps some APIs for forums as well. The idea with Citizen is to be a sort of high-level set of APIs that anybody can import without too much trouble and build more advanced applications. There we go. So that we, again, keep things accessible. But it's also going to be, it's our plan for the backbone for building this sort of decentralized social network of people's personal websites. The challenge with any of that is making the file formats compatible with each other. I think for the moment we're still compatible with Fritter, and the plan is to try to stay compatible with Fritter in the long term. But I don't know, things will have to evolve on that. File format compatibility is going to be a very complex part of all this. Making schemas stay compatible with each other, detecting when they're not, understanding why they're not, detecting when the incompatibility is actually a problem or something that you can ignore. We've done a little bit of research on this, and it's going to be a long process to get it all figured out. But right now, Joshua, things should not set on fire. Fritter and Citizen should be compatible. David Whitmore was the mystery. He was the one that typed in the URL manually. Wow, I'm impressed. David, no need to help with the connection timeouts. It's not something we need to worry about for now. I am so impressed that you typed that in manually. It's great. Well, we'll be winding it down real quick. I'm just going to check my calendar to see if there are any notable events coming up. If anybody's going to be in NodeConf Argentina, that's October 18th through the 20th, Tara's going to be there. And she's going to be talking about Beaker and Dat. So NodeConf Argentina in October. Keep an eye out for that if you're going. Also in November, on the 15th through the 18th, is Cascadia JS, and Tara's going to be there too, given the rundown. So Cascadia JS and NodeConf Argentina. Tara's going to be making an appearance. And in fact, she's on the way back right now from Full Stack Fest in Barcelona, which is why she's not joining us today. So. All right, folks. Well, I think that pretty much is a good stopping point. So, as always, thank you so much for joining me. Feel free to reach out on Twitter, on email, IRC, GitHub issues. You know where to reach me. And I think that about covers it. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Have a good weekend. And I'll catch you online. Have a good one, everybody.